Burn my skin. You remember that, right? Your turn. Fun fact, even though my skin didn't char.
We have been so locked into Homelander's perspective in this dynamic that something important almost slipped past without getting the attention it deserved. While everyone was focused on Homelander, on his reactions and his psychology and what his choices reveal about where this season is heading, Soldier Boy was doing something in the background of this episode that reframes the entire relationship if you give it the weight it actually carries. He was looking at photos of Stormfront, standing there quietly, looking down at them, and something was happening on his face that this show does not usually allow him. Not the performative disgust of someone trying to publicly distance themselves from something embarrassing. Not the practiced indifference of a man too proud to admit something affected him. Something genuine. Something private. The quiet and specific disappointment of a person processing the full reality of who someone they were connected to actually turned out to be. Stormfront was a Nazi. Not a casual one. Not someone who drifted toward ugly ideology through ignorance or circumstance. A true believer in something genuinely monstrous, committed to it at a level that makes any connection to her retroactively complicated in a way that cannot be cleanly resolved. And whatever Soldier Boy felt about her, whatever their relationship was in whatever form it took, finding out the full depth of what she was clearly landed on him in a way he was not prepared for. He stood there with those photos and he was somewhere else entirely. Processing something, working through something, feeling something that his entire public persona is specifically constructed to prevent anyone from ever seeing, and Homelander saw it. That jealous flicker returned, the same one that has crossed his face in previous episodes whenever Soldier Boy's attention goes anywhere that isn't him. Because Homelander is always watching, always measuring, always calculating exactly where he stands in relation to the people around him and whether that position is secure. And the sight of Soldier Boy standing there with genuine feeling on his face while looking at photos of someone who was not Homelander was enough to remind him that he is still, even now, even after everything, competing for a place in this man's attention, that he has not won it, that it has not been fully given. That Soldier Boy's emotional world contains other people and other histories and other losses that Homelander is not the center of. That realization does something specific to Homelander. It does not make him pull back. It does not produce self-awareness or perspective. It produces hunger. It makes the need sharper and more urgent and more dangerous. Because Homelander does not respond to emotional competition by stepping back and examining why he feels that way. He responds by escalating. By pushing harder. By finding new ways to demand the attention and acknowledgement that he cannot simply ask for, because asking would require a vulnerability he has never been allowed to develop. So the jealousy you see flickering across his face in that moment is not trivial. It is not a small character beat thrown in for texture. It is a warning. It is the show telling you exactly what fuel is being added to the fire right now. 4 episodes before everything ends. But the Stormfront moment also tells us something important about Soldier Boy that the ego and the bluster and the casual cruelty usually obscure. Soldier Boy is capable of genuine feeling. He has connections that go beyond utility and self-interest. He experiences loss and disappointment in ways that actually register, even if he would rather die than admit it openly. Which means that the relationship he has with Homelander is not as simple as it presents itself. It is not purely strategic calculation on his part. It is not cold detachment from a man who happens to share his biology. There is something real in there. Something complicated and unresolved, and probably irresolvable given who both of these people are and what they have each done and been through. And that complicated realness is exactly what makes the next 4 episodes so genuinely unpredictable. Because here is the thing about 2 people who have genuine feeling for each other, but are fundamentally incapable of expressing or processing that feeling in healthy ways. They do not resolve cleanly. They do not arrive at understanding through honest conversation and mutual vulnerability. They collide. They wound each other in the specific ways that only people who know each other deeply can manage. They make choices driven by emotion while telling themselves it is strategy. And they produce outcomes that neither of them planned for, and neither of them can fully control once things start moving. Soldier Boy looking at those photos of Stormfront was the show quietly reminding you that underneath all of the noise and the violence and the political chaos of this final season, there is a father and a son who have no idea what to do with each other. And whatever they decide in the episodes that remain, it will not be decided rationally. It will be decided in a moment. Probably the wrong one, and the consequences will be felt by everyone still standing around them. Which brings us to the part of this episode that the 5 perspective structure was actually building toward the entire time. Because while Firecracker was losing everything and Soldier Boy was standing over unconscious Homelander making the decision that changed the rest of this season, the show was also quietly laying out something about the wider world of this finale that tells you exactly how bad things are about to get. And it starts with understanding what an impatient Homelander actually looks like. Because we have seen him angry before. We have seen him violent and unpredictable and terrifying. But impatient is different. Impatient is the version of him that does not calculate consequences anymore. And that version has a body count that this show has not even begun to approach yet. Every version of Homelander we have seen across this show's run has operated with some level of restraint underneath the violence. Not moral restraint. Not empathy or conscience or any genuine concern for the people around him. But strategic restraint. The calculated understanding that there are things he cannot do yet. Lines he cannot cross publicly. Appearances he needs to maintain because the system he operates within still requires a version of him that the world can look at without flinching. He has always known that. He has always, on some level, been playing to an audience. Managing perception. Keeping enough of the performance intact that the machinery around him continues to function and continues to serve his needs. That restraint, as thin and brittle as it has always been, has been the thing standing between what Homelander is and what Homelander is genuinely capable of becoming. This episode told us that restraint is gone. Not fraying. Not being tested. Gone. And the specific way it disappeared is more important than the fact of its disappearance. Because it did not go in a moment of rage. It did not get burned away in a single explosive confrontation or a public breaking point that everyone could see happening in real time. It went quietly. It went in a private room, in a look that crossed his face after Firecracker hit the floor, in the specific quality of the stillness that followed. There was no satisfaction in it. No release. No performance of power for an imagined audience. Just a man who had made a decision and moved on before the consequences of that decision had even fully landed. That is a different Homelander than the one we have been watching. And it is a significantly more dangerous one. The patience that Homelander has been operating with this season has been built on a specific expectation that the project of his ascension, the Democratic Church of America, the positioning of himself as a divine figure, the slow and systematic consolidation of power and worship, was going somewhere. That it was building toward something that would eventually deliver what he actually wants. Not control, not dominance, not fear, which he has always had, but genuine belief, real worship from people who have chosen it freely, rather than had it forced upon them by circumstances and self-preservation. That expectation has been the thing keeping him functional, the thing giving his behavior a forward momentum rather than a destructive spiral. And this episode, through Firecracker's confession, through the reality she laid bare in that final desperate conversation, confirmed something for him that he cannot unhear. The people around him are not believers. They are survivors. They are people making calculated decisions about how to stay alive in proximity to something they cannot predict or control or escape from. The worship is performed. The faith is fabricated. The entire edifice of devoted followers that he has been constructing around himself is hollow at its center, and everyone inside it knows it, and he is the last one to have been told. That revelation does not produce grief in Homelander. It does not produce self-reflection or the kind of crisis that might, in a different person, open a door to change. It produces something far simpler and far more destructive. It produces the end of waiting. It would be convenient if this season's final stretch was a clean story about good people trying to stop a bad one. If the 5 perspectives this episode cycled through had given us at least one side of this conflict that felt genuinely capable, genuinely united, genuinely ready for what is coming. But The Boys has never been that show, and this episode made sure you felt that all the way through. Because the people positioned against Homelander in these final episodes are not an army. They are a collection of individually damaged, mutually distrustful, emotionally compromised people who are trying to function as a unit while carrying the specific weight of everything this show has put them through across 5 seasons. And that weight is showing in ways that matter. The POV structure of this episode was doing something specific by letting us sit inside multiple perspectives across a single timeline. It was not just a stylistic choice or a way to make the episode feel different from the ones surrounding it. It was a deliberate mechanism for showing you the gap between how people present themselves and what is actually happening inside them. Every character we followed in this episode was performing a version of themselves that was at least partially disconnected from their actual internal state. The composure was maintained. The roles were played, and underneath every single one of those performances was something fragile and fraying and genuinely frightened, not just of Homelander, of what comes next, of whether they have anything left that is sufficient for what this ending is going to demand of them. Butcher's trajectory this season has been the clearest version of this fracture. He has always operated at the edge of functionality, using forward momentum as a substitute for genuine stability, moving fast enough that the things chasing him from the inside cannot quite catch up. But the closer this gets to ending, the more visible the cost of that strategy becomes. The anger that used to feel like fuel is starting to feel like the only thing holding the structure upright. Remove it, and there might not be anything underneath that can stand on its own. And the people around him feel that. They have always felt it. The question that this episode raised without fully answering is whether Butcher's particular brand of barely contained self-destruction is going to be an asset in the final stretch or the thing that breaks the entire effort apart at the exact moment it can least afford to break. Annie is holding it together with a precision that is quietly terrifying to watch because you can see how much of her energy is going into the holding. She has been the moral center of this show's final season in a way that nobody really asked her to be, and that she did not ask to be either. It simply fell to her, because the alternatives were worse, and because she is the person in this group who has not yet fully abandoned the idea that how you win matters as much as whether you win. That position is an increasingly lonely one. And this episode, through the accumulation of small moments rather than any single confrontation, showed you exactly how lonely it has become. She is not losing faith, but she is watching the people around her make decisions she cannot fully endorse, and she is choosing to stay anyway, because leaving would be worse. That is a very specific and very exhausting place to operate from. And then there is the structural problem that sits underneath all of the individual fractures, which is that the plan, such as it is, depends on a level of coordination and mutual trust that this group has never reliably managed, even in its best moments. They have operated effectively in crisis before. They have pulled things together when the pressure was immediate and the options were narrowing fast. But the kind of sustained and coherent effort that the final 4 episodes are going to require is a different challenge entirely. It requires people to not just function under pressure, but to genuinely trust each other's judgment in moments when that trust is not intuitive. When someone is making a call that another person would not make. When the plan requires everyone to hold their position even when holding it feels wrong. This group has never been good at that. It is constitutionally incapable of it in certain combinations. And Homelander, whether by design or simply by virtue of what he has become, is about to create exactly the kind of pressure that exposes that incapability at the worst possible time. Because an impatient Homelander does not give his opponents time to regroup or recalibrate or work through their internal tensions at a pace that is manageable. He forces decisions. He creates situations where the options narrow fast and the cost of hesitation is measured in bodies. And a group that is already fractured and exhausted and running on something closer to habit than genuine cohesion is not well positioned for that kind of pressure. The most dangerous possibility this episode quietly introduced is not that Homelander wins. It is that the people trying to stop him make a mistake not out of weakness or cowardice, but out of the accumulated damage of everything they have been through. That they get to the critical moment and someone breaks. Not because they wanted to, not because they stopped caring, but because 5 seasons of this show's specific brand of punishment finally catches up with them at the exact moment when catching up is most catastrophic. That is the version of this ending that would hurt the most. And based on everything this episode showed us about the state of the people on that side of this conflict, it is not a remote possibility. It is the most likely one. The question is not whether someone breaks. The question is who, and whether what breaks with them can ever be put back together before the credits roll on the final episode of this show. But before we get to the ending and what it all means for the 4 episodes still to come, there is one more thread this episode introduced that I have not seen anyone give the attention it deserves. Because running underneath all of the Homelander psychology and the Soldier Boy decisions and the fractures on both sides of this war was something the episode was building toward in its quieter moments. Something about belief itself, about what it means, about what it costs, and about what happens to people and to systems and to entire worlds when the thing that was supposed to hold everything together turns out to be hollow at its core. Because if genuine belief is not available, if the thing he has been building toward is structurally impossible given who and what he is, then the project changes. The goal shifts, and an impatient Homelander who has abandoned the goal of being genuinely worshipped is a Homelander who has nothing left to moderate his behavior. Nothing to perform for. Nothing to protect. A Homelander who has stopped trying to be loved is a Homelander who has accepted that fear is all he will ever have. And a man who has accepted that, who has made peace with being a monster because the alternative of being something better has been conclusively denied to him, is not going to keep making careful decisions. He is going to start making final ones. The 4 episodes remaining are not going to look like anything this season has built so far. The careful political maneuvering, the franchise expansion, the slow burn of institutional power consolidating around a superhero turned deity. All of that required a Homelander who was still invested in the long game. That Homelander died in that room with Firecracker. What replaced him is something the show has been gesturing toward since the very